At Presbyterian Villages of Michigan, seniors can age in place with confidence.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome. It's a beautiful day today, isn't it? And the Tigers won last night, so we're all happy. I have a feeling today will be one of those days in Michigan that takes our breath away, what we call the Chamber of Commerce days. And so I have the joy this morning of kicking off on a very positive note with a presentation called Aging Well, the Best Revenge. And why did I call it Aging Well, the Best Revenge? Father Time plays little tricks on us, doesn't he? How many folks in here have looked in the mirror sideways lately and said, what the heck happened? Or we might be helping our child or grandchild to learn to drive, and doesn't that surprise us? We think, didn't I just learn to drive last week? Or didn't I just go to the prom last month? So those little tricks sometimes play games with us. And we all can be in a little bit of denial, right? Now, the bad news is there's no fountain of youth, correct? Ponce de Leon found that out long ago. There is no fountain of youth. No matter how many commercials you see that say, wear this face cream and you'll look 20 years younger, there is no fountain of youth. But the good news is that we can wreak revenge on Father Time by aging well. And we're going to make that emphasis today on how to age well. We're not talking about anti-aging. I don't believe in anti-aging. We're talking about aging well. Now, going back to that issue of denial, we see that around us all the time, right? We see people who don't want to give out their birth date. One of the reasons that I was motivated to do these kinds of talks is I went to a new dentist at the age of 50. And the gal at the desk asked me my age and then apologized. And I said, you don't need to apologize for asking my age. I'm proud of every year. She said, you would not believe the number of 20-somethings, 30-somethings, and 40-somethings who get angry when I ask their age. And at that moment, I thought, we had better do something in our society or we're going to be in real trouble in the years ahead. Now, one of the things about aging that teaches us is that many of the principles of our lifetime really tie into aging well. And we all know, right, that our self-image plays a huge part in how we do in life, probably the largest part in how we do in life. Well, the same thing is true in aging. And I think it's very sad to see that I've noticed some people who had a positive image for much of their life, and then as they age, that image begins to be tarnished, their self-image. And so we need to look at aging as a positive experience and part of our lifespan. Many other cultures do that, and ours needs a little bit of a way to go in how we look at aging. So I have a few examples of how people have been into denial just a little bit. I have a friend who's a wonderful human being, kind, loving, wonderful to be around, competent, but he has a little bit of a glare once in a while if he's not happy about something. So he had turned 50, and he received his AARP card, and that didn't bother him a bit. He was ready for that. We all like those discounts, right? We like that magazine. But he went to a University of Michigan versus Ohio State football game. He bleeds maize and blue, and one of his best friends of 30 years is an Ohio State fan, and they went to this game together. Well, unfortunately for those of us in Michigan, Ohio State beat University of Michigan that day on their home field. So the Michigan fans were a little grumpy about that. And according to this person, the Ohio State fans were being obnoxious, rowdy, and disgusting. Can you imagine that? And so he whirled around to glare at these young Ohio State students, and they could not have said anything more perfect to get back at him, because they looked him up and down and said, "Oh, we're sorry, sir. We didn't mean the older Michigan fans." Well, that about destroyed him for a few weeks, even though he'd been ready for that AARP card. And we all can get a little bit into that denial. Another example, I was at a Rolling Stones concert a while ago, And there were people from their 20s through their 80s at this concert. And our particular section had a lot of 60-somethings. It might have been a lot of group tickets or company tickets. And everybody was kind of grooving to the music and feeling young and vibrant until a 30-something gentleman and his girlfriend came and sat down. And they looked around and loudly he said, "Wow, look at all these old fans." Well, our entire section had whiplash because they were looking for the 80-somethings. And all of a sudden it dawned on them that he was talking about us. Well, they actually glared so much that he got up and left. He felt a little uncomfortable. So he had crashed through that denial that everybody was experiencing. Because what do we know about older people? People say to me, well, what is the definition of an older person? And so for some programs, AARP finds us at 50 or earlier, right? We should all be as good at marketing as AARP is. For some programs, it's 55, some 60, some 65. Social Security is inching up further. The United Nations defines an older person as someone who's 60 years or older. But the true definition of an older person is somebody who's 20 years older than we are, right? So once again, those 60-somethings looking for those 80-somethings. Now, the good news is that we can break through that denial and we can do what we call embrace aging and turn that into a positive experience for us. And so one of the things I like to talk about when it comes to aging well is just to take the word age and use that as an acronym. So age starts with A, correct? And there's a very good reason that the word age starts with A, because attitude is the most important part of aging well. Would you agree with that? There are other aspects as well, but attitude will offset more challenges than just about anything else. And I've had some wonderful experiences getting to know people around the country and how they deal with aging. And you've probably experienced this as well with clients, family, friends. It is truly amazing how differently people deal with aging. So one experience I heard about was a woman with a great attitude named Edna. And this was some years ago. She was turning 99 years old. And back then, it was pretty unique to turn 99. Now today, we have millions of centenarians, right, turning 100 or more. But back then, it was a little unique still. So they gave a huge birthday bash for her 99th birthday, her family and friends. And it was such a big deal in this small community that a reporter came to cover the story. And he was a young whippersnapper reporter, full of zest and vitality, and just loved the party. So at the end, he came up to Edna and he said, "You know, Edna, I had a wonderful time at this party, way beyond my expectations. And I'm going to get a great story out of this with wonderful pictures." And then he kind of leaned in conspiratorially to Edna and said, "And you know, Edna, next year at this time, I sincerely hope I can come back and celebrate your 100th birthday with you." Now, we know what he was thinking, right? And Edna knew what he was thinking. Would she still be around next year to celebrate that 100th birthday? But Edna, having a great attitude, looked him up and down and said, "Well, I don't see why not, young man. You look perfectly healthy to me." Now that's a great attitude. Another example of attitude was from Joan Collins. Do you remember Joan Collins from Dynasty, the very tricky, treacherous, beautiful woman? Well, she has aged very well in lots of ways. I'm sure she's had a little help with that, but she's aged very well, both mentally and physically. And she was doing a speaking tour in Europe, and she had just married a younger man. And there's a little bit of prejudice that goes towards that type of relationship along with ageism. We often don't think twice if an older gentleman marries a younger woman. And so the press just wouldn't leave her alone. She kept trying to talk about her latest venture, and they kept saying, "Well, aren't you worried? You've got this young husband. Aren't you worried he'll go out on you? Aren't you worried about this or that?" And finally, she got so disgusted with him, she said, "If he goes, he goes." Another good attitude. A little bit of humor added in there. So attitude will play a huge part. And it's not just having a sense of humor or knowing that we have longevity. It's how we look at life. We probably all know certain people where you're afraid to ask them how they are, because we'll get the latest rendition of their hangnail or some little thing that went wrong, maybe a huge laundry list of things. And what positive thinking people will tell us is that we want to avoid that negativity, turn that into a positive experience. And there are going to be challenges along the way, no doubt. There are challenges in life, there are challenges to aging. And guess what? Along with there not being a fountain of youth, nobody gets 4 aces in the deck, right? We all have issues to deal with, and we all have positive things we can look at. We all have a family history of certain chronic illnesses or things that we need to pay attention to. So we don't get 4 aces, but it's what we do with the hand that's been given us that will make the difference in aging well. Now, one thing that can be very positive note, the second letter in age is G, and that's genetics. And there's no doubt that genetics plays a part, right? I mentioned that we all have some chronic issues. The good news about that is that genetics really only plays about a 25 to 30% impact of the aging process on us. The rest of the impact, which is far greater, is based on the choices that we make and how we handle our lifespan, along with the attitude that we have. Now, in this area, I got 1 ace for sure, because I found out that I have an ancestor in the 1800s who lived to be 114 years of age. So I figure that's a pretty good ace. I had a grandfather who lived to be 98 back in the late 1960s, and when he was about 96, he went downtown to buy a new pair of shoes, and he walked downtown. He used to walk miles. He had been a farmer, and it had rained earlier in the day, and there were huge puddles around. And we looked out the window, and there was my grandfather coming home and jumping over the mud puddles in his PF Flyers. So I do have some good aces. And everybody in this room has some great aces in their hand for life. So what can we do to offset some of those issues with genetics? And that goes to the E, which is we want to embrace life at any age and embrace aging. And for some people, that's a little controversial. They say, embrace aging? I don't know. If I get to be 85, do I want to keep going? Yes, we can look at it as embracing aging. There are so many possibilities that we haven't experienced before. And this is a true blessing that we're living in the times that we are and being able to have the longevity that we have. If you think about it, a century ago, even a few decades ago, it was almost unheard of to be able to see the birth of your great-grandchild, or to see your grandchild or great-grandchild get married or have their own children. And so we have that wonderful joy of being able to create a legacy. How many folks in here are grandparents? Quite a few. Great. So you have that. I've noticed that seems to be the greatest job on earth, to be a grandparent. And they've said that there's a commonality between grandchildren and grandparents, a very strong common bond. And that is they can sort of think about how they can get back at the generation in between. So the grandparents and the grandchildren team up on the parents sometimes. But at any rate, these blessings that we have are something that we've never experienced before. So we're even able to recreate bone density, and with the procedures and the medications that exist, as well as the knowledge and information that we have, we're going to have opportunities that we've never had before. So we have people who are retiring and then starting a second career or a business, or they're getting involved in places like Presbyterian Villages of Michigan or the Institute of Gerontology or the Interfaith Health and Hope Coalition, and helping folks have quality of life and experiencing some of the best work that they've ever done. And this isn't new, is it? We all know about Grandma Moses. I once had a thrill of meeting Marcel Mouly, who was a French painter. He was the last living protege of Picasso, until a few years ago. And I saw him at an opening of his paintings and his artwork, and he had as much vitality as anybody in that audience. We hear about marathon runners in their 90s and people just doing incredible things physically, or going to another country and helping in terms of treatment of water, or helping build schools. So we have a chance to give back as well as create joy in our own lives. But you know, another aspect about that is we don't have to be a marathon runner. If you've never been a marathon runner, you may still want to do that, but you might want to do something else. And one of the things I found when I was the state aging director is being around volunteers is the best up you'll ever get in life. Volunteers tend to be positive people, they tend to have a sense of humor, they tend to be very giving, and so some of my favorite experiences were going around to their recognition dinners. And MetLife and others have done studies that have let us know that when we're engaged, when we're embracing life, when we're giving to others, that tends to not only increase our longevity, but increase our quality of life as well. And so one of my favorite stories about a volunteer was a woman who was a foster grandparent. You've probably heard of these programs. Michigan has some of the best programs in the country for volunteerism with seniors. And so this foster grandparent was going into a little elementary school and helping the students with certain activities or lessons. And they really got to know her so well that they thought of her like their own grandma. She had had such an impact on this class. But the only problem the teacher was having is she could only be there about 3 times a week for a certain amount of time. And so when she would leave, the children would get upset that she was leaving. So for survival's sake, anybody in here ever been a teacher? You know, you get those survival tactics going on. For survival, the teacher said what was a very plausible response, and that was, Grandma Fran has to go home and cook dinner for Grandpa Richard. Well, they kind of got that because their parents and grandparents cooked dinner, and that was going along pretty well until one night Fran was out to dinner with her husband, and she looked up and she saw one of the little boys from her class named Mikey. So she said to her husband, come on, we got to go over, I want to introduce you to Mikey. So she took her husband over to meet him, and as they were shaking hands, Mikey was glaring at him. He had his lip out like this, looking him up and down, and he said, why don't you cook your own dinner? He had about had it with Grandma Fran leaving. But that shows you what an impact she had had with those children. And yet she, like every other volunteer I've ever talked to, said, I get far more out of it than the children get out of it. They would probably disagree, but volunteers always tell us. So I'm sure probably almost everybody in this room has volunteered to some degree, and that's really part of aging well, a very good thing to do. Now, another thing we can do is to manage our stress levels. That has such a negative impact at any point in our life. And I remember I used to be a corporate training consultant, and people who would be working a full-time job, going to school, raising a family in high stress levels. But we can have stress at any time in our lives. And so it could be, you know, dealing with finances, children or grandchildren who want to go to an Ivy League college and we're trying to help out with that, or managing our time, or maybe friends who are having challenges or family members. And so how we deal with that stress makes a big difference. I don't know of anybody who would say they have a totally stress-free life, although some retirees I know have said they're getting closer to that. How many folks in here have had some stress management training? Quite a few, great. Again, back in my corporate training days, they were doing a lot of stress management training. I don't think as much is being done these days, which I think is another sad thing. We need to do more of that. But it's not so much the stress that comes at us, it's how we deal with that stress. And so if we don't deal with stress well, it becomes what's called distress. So what happens is our bodies are built much like caveman days were, and they've created what's called the fight or flight response. Have you heard of that? And so our body gears up to either fight off the stress or flee, run away from it. Because back in the caveman days, what were the big stressors? Fire, floods, going for food, maybe fighting off wild animals. So our bodies, again, as a survival mechanism, built up this stress response to be able to survive. And so what happens in the stress response, you've probably experienced this, when you have to slam on your brakes right away, if somebody pulls in front of you, you feel your muscles tighten, maybe a little short of breath, that's the stress response kicking in so you can avert that accident. Now, I don't know about anybody else around here. I've driven over 83 counties in Michigan. I've driven around the country, one year 100,000 miles, but I have yet to see a saber-toothed tiger on the highway, right? Every once in a while you hear those wild reports on the news about some huge animal escaping, but usually our stress is not saber-toothed tigers or forest fires we have to run from, that kind of thing. Our stressors are a little bit different. So again, it might be that traffic jam. It might be we've agreed to volunteer so much that we're stressing ourselves out. I don't want to do a bad sell for volunteering, but we do need to have some balance there. Again, it might be dealing with some physical challenges or our families. So what we need to do is either burn off that stress or move to the opposite, which is the relaxation response. And the relaxation response is the antidote to the stress. So if we want to fight it off, how many folks in here play tennis, racquetball, take long walks, punch bags, do Tai Chi? All of that is a way of burning off that stress. It releases it from our body. Even taking a deep breath will release that. The opposite, again, is the relaxation response. So how many here do yoga, meditation, maybe listen to soft music? Maybe you have a garden you like to work in or go to that relaxes you. So that's an example of the relaxation response. And I sincerely believe that's why vacations are so popular, at least one of the reasons, right? We get a little more of that time where we move into the relaxation response. But what we can learn is we don't necessarily have to go on vacation or pay thousands of dollars. We can learn to build that over time every day. Now, there's a law in psychology that states that you cannot hold on to two opposite extreme feelings or emotions at the same time. What will happen is the strongest one will win out. So people with phobias where they treat with dissociation techniques, that's what they do. They make a positive experience so strong that it offsets the negative response. So if we want to be successful with stress management, we need to build up that relaxation response very strongly so that it offsets. And then you can do something like take a deep breath or say relax, and that'll bring you, I see a couple people doing it right here. Very good. Practicing that. That's wonderful. So managing stress is another thing. And then finally, there's so many other things we could talk about, but another is humor, laughter. You've probably heard that laughter is the best medicine, right? And creative thinking experts, and I think this is a problem in boardrooms across the country. We get so serious and we get so focused, and definitely we need that. But we also need some laughter. We need some enjoyment. And creative thinking experts will tell you if you have humor and laughter and creativity around you, you will be far more successful. I think George Burns was a perfect example of humor, right? He lived to almost 100, and he had a great sense of humor. So having that sense of humor can help us relax, enjoy life, and really take it with a grain of salt. Once again, I remember years ago when I was a social worker, and we had a lot of controversy in the community with opening up group homes, and I had a county commissioner who was wonderful to work with. And his advice still stuck with me. He said, I'm just like a duck. I just let it roll off my back, Lynn. Don't worry about it. And I thought, what a great attitude to have. Another example I heard of that was a gal in one of my seminars at an automobile company said her husband is always upbeat, always smiling, everything's wonderful. She said, you know, he's so much like that that sometimes it almost gets on your nerves. And so she said she was grousing about something and complaining and very upset. And he said, oh, well, just take a breath, think optimistically, it'll work out. And he gave her a couple of positive comments, and she looked at him and said, "Well, that's really easy for you." And he looked at her and said, "What makes you think that?" So sometimes we have to work at continuing that positive attitude and meeting those challenges head on. So let's go back to that notion then that we have the whole rest of our lives to age well, to have wonderful possibilities and experiences, whether it's playing the piano, whether it's going to a place we've never been before and trekking around somewhere, or whether it's helping create a whole new group of youth who are motivated to go to college or have extra training and give back in life. So many opportunities that we can have in life. And I want to leave with one final thought, which is that in life, it's not how many breaths we take, but it's how many moments that take our breath away. And so I want to wish you many moments that take your breath away, and I hope you enjoy this wonderful conference, which will help us all age well. Thank you.
For more information, visit pvm.org or call 248-281-2020.